An ordinary day takes a dramatic turn when he learns the true identity of his maid. The revelation forces him to confront his past and seek redemption. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Richard Thompson's Bel Air mansion, casting long shadows across Italian marble floors. Richard sat up in his king-sized bed, his hand instinctively reaching for the prescription sleeping pills on his nightstand. Another night of fragmented sleep, haunted by memories he'd spent decades burying. He made his way to his home office, a spacious room dominated by a mahogany desk and walls lined with awards from various real estate associations. The room screamed success, but Richard's eyes kept drifting to a single silver frame. The photo showed a perfectly curated family moment. His wife, Veronica, immaculate in a designer dress, standing beside him while their two children, Thomas and Elizabeth, smiled with practiced precision. The image represented everything he'd built, and everything that felt increasingly hollow. Richard adjusted his tie, preparing for another day of meetings and property acquisitions. His phone buzzed with messages from developers and investors, each demanding his immediate attention. He'd built his empire through ruthless dedication, never letting sentiment cloud his judgment. Yet lately, something felt off, like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. The household staff moved efficiently around him, maintaining the careful choreography of luxury living. His head housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, approached with her characteristic efficiency. "Mr. Thompson, the new personal assistant has arrived. Should I send her in?" Richard nodded absently, scanning through emails on his phone. He heard footsteps and looked up to meet the gaze of Maya Martinez. Something about her eyes made him freeze. They were dark and intense, holding a familiar quality that sent an uncomfortable jolt through his chest. Maya stood straight-backed in her simple black dress, her expression professional but guarded. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Maya. I look forward to working for you." Richard found himself staring longer than appropriate. There was something in her bearing, in the set of her jaw, that stirred long-buried memories. He shook off the sensation, attributing it to lack of sleep. "Welcome aboard, Maya. Mrs. Chun will show you your duties." Throughout the morning, Richard caught glimpses of Maya as she learned the household routine. Each time, that nagging sense of recognition grew stronger. He tried to focus on work, on the major development project he needed to inspect that afternoon, but his concentration kept slipping. By early afternoon, Richard had to escape the mansion's suddenly stifling atmosphere. He got into his Mercedes S-Class, trying to outrun the unsettling feelings Maya's presence had stirred up. The coastal road to his latest development site usually calmed him, but today his hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly. His phone rang, another investor call he couldn't ignore. As he reached for it, a car swerved into his lane. Richard jerked the wheel, but everything happened too fast. Metal screamed against metal. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of sky and asphalt. He felt a sickening impact, then nothing. The next clear sensation was pain and the rhythmic beep of hospital monitors. Richard tried to move, but found his body wouldn't respond. Panic rose in his throat as a doctor explained terms like spinal cord injury and partial paralysis. The mighty Richard Thompson, who had spent his life shaping the California skyline through sheer force of will, now lay helpless in a hospital bed. As doctors and nurses moved around him, Richard's mind kept returning to Maya's face, to that haunting familiarity in her eyes. It was as if the accident had cracked Psalm, effing open in his mind, letting long-suppressed memories seep through. But he couldn't face those thoughts now, not when his entire world had just been upended. Later, alone in the darkness of his hospital room, Richard finally admitted to himself what he'd recognized in Maya's eyes. They were exactly like his own. The sterile hospital room became Richard's new prison, a stark contrast to his carefully curated mansion. The doctor spoke in measured tones about his prognosis, but their words blurred together as his mind drifted between present pain and past regrets. The paralysis confined him below the waist, forcing him to rely on others for the most basic tasks. a cruel twist for a man who had built his life on absolute control. During the long nights, when pain medication clouded his thoughts, memories he'd suppressed for decades began to surface with cruel clarity. 25 years ago, in a small apartment in East Los Angeles, he had made a decision that would haunt him. Elena, young and beautiful, holding their newborn daughter. His own voice, cold and distant, explaining why he couldn't be part of their lives. The sound of a door closing as he walked away, choosing his ambitious future over their shared past. The memory of Elena's tears merged with Maya's intense gaze, creating a connection he could no longer deny. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Maya's face superimposed over that long-ago scene. The timing matched. The resemblance was undeniable. The daughter he had abandoned now worked in his home, serving the family he had chosen instead of her. News of his accident spread quickly through his business circles and social networks. His phone buzzed constantly with messages he couldn't bring himself to read. Among the hospital staff's updates about his condition, he kept hoping to hear Maya's name, though he couldn't admit this desire even to himself. Maya, meanwhile, stood in her small apartment across town, staring at her phone, displaying news headlines about Richard Thompson's accident. Her hands trembled as she read about his condition. The man she had carefully tracked down, the father who had abandoned her and her mother, now lay helpless in a hospital bed. She had taken the job in his household deliberately, planning to confront him eventually, but now everything had changed. She paced her room, filled with conflicting emotions. Part of her felt a savage satisfaction at his suffering. Let him know what it felt like to be helpless, to depend on others' mercy. Another part remembered the little girl who had spent countless nights dreaming of a father's love, who had waited by windows hoping he would appear and explain why he had left. Veronica Thompson's arrival at the hospital created a stir among the staff. She swept in wearing designer clothes and perfect makeup, playing the role of devoted wife for the benefit of any watching eyes. But when she entered Richard's room, her facade cracked slightly. "The board is getting nervous," she said, arranging flowers by his bedside. "We need to project strength right now. The Martinez development deal is hanging by a thread." Richard watched her, seeing for the first time how their relationship had become a business arrangement more than a marriage. "I need to tell you something about Maya," he said. Veronica's hands stilled on the flowers. "The new girl? What about her?" "She's my daughter." The words hung in the air between them. Veronica's face went through a series of micro-expressions: shock, anger, calculation. "How long have you known?" "I suspected when I first saw her. The accident, it's made everything clearer." "This could ruin everything we've built," Veronica said, her voice tight. "The company, our position in society, the children's inheritance. Have you thought about any of that?" Richard looked at his wife of 20 years, the woman who had helped him build his empire, and saw a stranger. "I've thought about nothing else for 25 years. Maybe that's been the problem." The tension between them grew thicker as Veronica realized the implications. Their carefully constructed life, built on Richard's ruthless pursuit of success, suddenly seemed fragile. She left the room without another word, her heels clicking against the hospital floor like a timer counting down to an explosion. Richard lay back in his bed, feeling the weight of decades of choices pressing down on him. Through his window, he could see the skyline he had helped shape, buildings reaching toward the clouds. But for the first time, these monuments to his success felt meaningless compared to the simple human connection he had thrown away all those years ago. Maya stood outside room 742 of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, her hand frozen inches from the door. The hallway's antiseptic smell reminded her of another hospital, 15 years ago, when she had sat beside her mother's deathbed. Elena had died without ever seeing Richard again, taking most of her secrets about him to the grave. Maya had been left with only fragments, an old photograph, a few tearful confessions, and the burning question of why he had walked away. Security cameras tracked her movement as she paced the hallway. As Richard's employee, she had legitimate reason to be there, but her presence felt like trespassing. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Your father made his choice, Mija. We have to respect that." But respect hadn't filled the empty chair at school events, hadn't explained to a young girl why she wasn't worthy of her father's love. Finally, Maya pushed the door open. Richard lay propped up in bed, his usual commanding presence diminished by hospital machinery and 4 lines. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. The resemblance between them, subtle but undeniable, hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. "Maya," Richard said, his voice rough. "You came." She moved into the room, but remained standing near the door. "Mr. Thompson, the household staff was concerned about your condition." Her professional tone felt like armor. "Please sit down." He gestured to the chair beside his bed, wincing slightly at the movement. When she didn't move, he added, "I think we both know this isn't just a courtesy visit from an employee." Maya's carefully maintained composure cracked. 25 years of silence, and now you want to talk? Because you're stuck in that bed and can't run away again. Richard flinched at her words. "I deserve that. I deserve worse. But I need you to know how sorry I am. Sorry." Maya's laugh was bitter. "I watched my mother work 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I grew up in a 1-room apartment while your other children lived in mansions. I had to drop out of art school to care for Mom when she got sick. Where was your sorry then?" Her words hit Richard like physical blows. The success he'd built, the wealth he'd accumulated, all of it felt hollow against the reality of his abandoned daughter's pain. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I had ambitions, plans for my future. Your mother and I were so young, and I convinced myself you'd both be better off without me. I told myself I was doing the right thing by staying away. And now?" Maya's voice trembled. "Why did you hire me? Did you know who I was?" Richard shook his head. "I suspected from the moment I saw you. You have your mother's strength, but you have my eyes. The accident. It forced me to stop running from the truth." Maya moved closer, her hands gripping the back of the chair. "I used to dream about finding you. Every birthday, every Christmas, I'd imagine you showing up at our door with some grand explanation that would make everything make sense. But you never came." "I can't change the past," Richard said softly. "But I'm here now, if you'll let me try to make amends." "Make amends?" Maya's voice rose. "Do you think you could just write a check and erase 25 years of abandonment? Buy back the moments you threw away?" "Richard," Dee tried to sit up straighter, frustration evident in his movement. "That's not what I— No," Maya cut him off. "You don't get to play the repentant father now, just because you're vulnerable. I didn't come here for your guilt or your excuses. I came because I needed to see for myself what kind of man would walk away from his child." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mom never stopped loving you, you know, even after everything. She made me promise not to hate you. I'm still working on keeping that promise." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Richard alone with the beeping monitors and the weight of his choices. Through his window, he could see the California sun setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the same colors as the day he had walked away from Elena and their newborn daughter. For the first time in decades, Richard Thompson, the man who had built an empire on calculated decisions and emotional detachment, felt tears running down his face. Richard's first physical therapy session felt like a battle against his own body. The therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah, guided him through exercises that once would have seemed trivially simple. Now, just trying to sit upright without support left him drenched in sweat. "The key is consistency," Sarah explained, helping him back into his wheelchair. "Your spine injury isn't complete. There's potential for improvement, but you'll need to work harder than you've ever worked before." Richard, who had built a real estate empire through sheer determination, found himself humbled by the challenge of moving his own toes. Each session became a stark reminder of how he'd taken his independence for granted. The other patients in the rehabilitation center didn't care about his net worth or his business achievements. Here, success was measured in millimeters of movement and seconds of sustained balance. Between therapy sessions, he began watching people differently. From his wheelchair, he noticed how his nurses treated each other, how families supported their loved ones through recovery, how complete strangers offered help without expecting anything in return. He saw humanity in ways his corner office view had never revealed. Meanwhile, across town, Maya stood before a blank canvas in her small apartment-turned studio. Art had always been her escape, her way of processing emotions too complex for words. Now, her brushes moved with new purpose, creating images that spoke of absence, healing, and the complicated space between anger and forgiveness. Her latest series, tentatively titled Fathers, caught the attention of a local gallery owner. The paintings featured fragmented male figures, some in business suits, others in hospital gowns, all somehow incomplete. The pain was evident in every brushstroke, but so was something else, a yearning for connection, for understanding. "Your work has evolved," her art mentor observed during a studio visit. "There's still anger, but it's not consuming the canvas anymore. You're letting light in." Maya couldn't deny the change. Each painting felt like a conversation she couldn't have with Richard in person. Each color choice a feeling she couldn't yet voice. The process was therapeutic, turning her private pain into something others could relate to and understand. Richard, learning of Maya's artistic talent through his staff, began researching the community where she grew up. East Los Angeles wasn't just a poor neighborhood he'd fled from. It was a vibrant community rich in culture, but starved for resources. He discovered that the local art program where Maya had first learned to paint was struggling to stay open. Using his business connections, he began quietly arranging support for community arts programs, not through grand gestures or public donations, but through careful, strategic investments in the neighborhood's infrastructure. He ensured his name stayed out of the press releases, not wanting Maya to see it as manipulation. The physical therapy continued to challenge him daily. Simple tasks like dressing himself or transferring from bed to wheelchair required intense concentration and patience, qualities he'd rarely applied to personal matters before. Sarah noticed his determination increasing, especially after his private phone calls to check on the community projects. "Your body is responding well," she noted during one particularly grueling session. "But I'm more impressed by the changes in your attitude. When you first arrived, you were angry at the world. Now you're focusing on what you can do for others." Richard thought about her words as he wheeled himself through the hospital corridors. He passed rooms filled with other patients facing their own battles, some with family members by their sides, others alone. He remembered Maya's words about working 3 jobs to care for her mother, about dropping out of art school. The contrast between their lives struck him anew. In his hospital room, he began drafting plans for a larger initiative, not just supporting existing programs, but creating new opportunities for young artists in underserved communities. He thought about Maya's talent, wondering how many other gifted individuals never got the chance to develop their abilities due to circumstances beyond their control. The project gave him purpose beyond his recovery. Between therapy sessions, he made calls, reviewed proposals, and refined his plans. His business associates noticed the change in his priorities, some with concern, others with surprise. At the same time, Maya's paintings began attracting more attention. A series of small gallery shows led to critical praise and growing recognition. She struggled with the attention, knowing that her most powerful work came from the very pain she was still trying to process. Each successful show felt both like a victory and a reminder of the long journey ahead. The parallel paths of father and daughter. One learning to rebuild his body and reshape his legacy, the other transforming her pain into art, continued to unfold, neither fully aware of how their separate journeys would eventually intersect. Maya met Jake Martinez, no relation, at a community center fundraiser where she was displaying her artwork. He stood longer than most visitors before her centerpiece, a large canvas depicting a businessman turned away from a child's reaching hand. Unlike other viewers who praised her technique or asked about her inspiration, Jake simply said, "You make people feel seen." Jake worked as a community organizer, focusing on affordable housing and arts education access. His worn jeans and practical button-down contrasted sharply with the cocktail attire of the other attendees. While gallery owners discussed price points, Jake talked about how art could give voice to marginalized communities. "Your work speaks to experiences many people in this neighborhood understand," he said, gesturing to her paintings. "The absence, the struggle, the resilience, it's all there." Maya found herself drawn to his genuine passion for social justice. Unlike the art world socialites who viewed her background as an interesting selling point, Jake saw it as a source of strength and authenticity. They ended up talking long after the event ended, sharing stories over coffee at a nearby diner. "I grew up here too," Jake explained. "Watched developers buy up buildings, force families out, all in the name of progress. Now I fight to keep communities intact." His words struck a chord with Maya, reminding her of the real estate empire her father had built. "Sometimes progress comes at a terrible cost," she replied, thinking of her mother. Their relationship developed naturally, built on shared values and understanding. Jake attended her gallery openings, offering quiet support rather than grand gestures. He understood her art in a way few others did, seeing beyond the technical skill to the emotional truth beneath. When Maya told him about Richard, about working in his house, and the accident that had changed everything, Jake listened without judgment. "You don't owe him forgiveness," he said simply, "but you owe yourself the chance to heal." Richard, meanwhile, learned about Jake through his security team's routine background checks on Maya's associates. The reports painted a picture of a dedicated activist who had successfully opposed several of Richard's past development projects. The irony wasn't lost on him. His daughter had found connection with someone who represented everything he had once dismissed as obstacle to progress. During one of their evening walks through the neighborhood, Maya finally opened up to Jake about her deepest fears. They sat on a park bench, watching children play basketball under streetlights. "Sometimes I look in the mirror and see him," she admitted. "My eyes, my determination, they're his. I'm afraid that part of me is just like him, capable of walking away from people who need me." Jake took her hand. "We're not defined by our parents' choices, Maya. You've proven that every day, staying here, fighting for this community, turning your pain into something beautiful." "But what if," Maya's voice caught, "what if I try to forgive him and he disappoints me again? What if I'm not strong enough to handle another rejection?" "You're already strong enough," Jake assured her. "You survived his absence. You took care of your mother. You built a life and career on your own terms. Whatever you decide about Richard, that's your choice to make, not his." Maya leaned against Jake's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. In the distance, car horns and street music created the familiar symphony of her neighborhood, the community she had chosen to stay in, even when success could have taken her elsewhere. "I used to dream about confronting him," she said quietly. "I had this whole speech prepared about how he ruined our lives. But now that I actually have the chance, I'm not sure what I want to say." Jake squeezed her hand. "Maybe that's because you're not that angry little girl anymore. You've grown into someone who understands that life is more complicated than villains and victims." Their conversation was interrupted by Maya's phone. Another message from Richard's house staff about his recovery progress. She stared at the screen, feeling the weight of unspoken words and untaken chances. "Whatever you decide," Jake said, reading her expression, "know that you're not alone anymore. Your strength isn't just about surviving his absence now. It's about choosing who you want to be in his presence." The streetlights cast long shadows across the basketball court as night settled over the neighborhood. Maya watched the young players, thinking about choices, legacy, and the different ways people learn to heal. The community center renovation project became a reluctant meeting ground for Richard and Maya. Richard participated via video calls from his wheelchair, while Maya attended meetings in person, both of them trying to maintain professional distance despite the personal undercurrents. "The building needs more than cosmetic updates," Maya explained during one session, spreading architectural plans across the conference table. "We need proper ventilation, accessible entrances, and a dedicated space for art classes." Richard, appearing on the large screen mounted on the wall, studied the proposals. His business instincts wanted to challenge the costs, but he caught himself, remembering the cramped community center where Maya had first learned to paint. "Whatever it needs, we'll make it happen." The project team noticed the tension between them, the careful way they avoided using each other's names, the long pauses before addressing one another, the way Maya would stare at her notes whenever Richard spoke. Yet somehow, their shared commitment to the project created a fragile bridge between Him. During one particularly heated discussion about budget allocations, Maya forgot their careful dance of formality. "You can't just throw money at everything and expect it to work," she snapped at Richard. "These people need sustainable solutions, not just a fancy building with your name on it." The meeting room fell silent. Richard's image on the screen remained still for a moment before he responded. "You're right. What would you suggest instead?" Their collaborative work didn't go unnoticed by Veronica. She arrived unannounced at Richard's rehabilitation facility, her Louboutin heels clicking ominously down the hallway. She found him reviewing community center documents after his therapy session. "The board is concerned," she began without preamble. "You're diverting resources to a project with no clear ROI, and rumors are starting about Maya's true identity." Richard set down his tablet. "I'm still majority shareholder. The board's concerns are noted." "It's not just the board, Richard." Veronica's voice dropped lower. "Have you forgotten what we discussed 25 years ago? The real reason you had to stay away from Elena and the baby." Richard's hands gripped his wheelchair armrests. "Are you threatening me, Veronica? I'm reminding you what's at stake." She pulled out her phone, showing him a news article about the community center project. "This little redemption story you're writing could unravel everything we've built. Some secrets need to stay buried." Meanwhile, Maya worked late at the community center, unaware of the conversation happening across town. She stood in what would become the main art studio, imagining future students finding their voice through creativity, just as she had. Jake's words about not owing Richard forgiveness echoed in her mind. The next project meeting was tense. Veronica attended in person, her presence adding an extra layer of complexity to the already strained dynamics. She sat beside Maya, offering suggestions that seemed helpful on the surface, but subtly undermined Maya's vision for the center. "Perhaps we should focus on more practical programs," Veronica suggested smoothly. "Art is wonderful, but job training might better serve the community." Maya felt Richard watching her reaction through the video feed. "Art taught me resilience," she responded, meeting Veronica's gaze. "It helped me process trauma, find my voice. These kids deserve the same opportunity." "Of course," Veronica smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "I just want to ensure we're making responsible choices with company resources." After the meeting, Veronica caught up with Maya in the parking lot. "You seem very invested in this project," she observed, "almost as if you have a personal stake in it." Maya recognized the threat beneath the polite inquiry. "I believe in giving back to my community, Mrs. Thompson. Isn't that what your family claims to value?" "Family values are exactly what concern me." Veronica's smile disappeared. "Richard may be feeling sentimental in his current condition, but don't mistake that for something more permanent. Some doors are better left closed." Maya watched Veronica drive away in her luxury SUV, feeling the weight of unspoken secrets pressing down on her. Later that night, she called Jake, needing to voice her growing unease. "Veronica knows something," she told him. "Something beyond just Richard's abandonment. I can feel it in the way she watches me, the way she chooses her words." "Be careful," Jake advised. "People with power and secrets can be dangerous when they feel threatened." The project continued moving forward, but the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. Richard seemed distracted during meetings, often lost in thought when not directly addressed. Maya noticed him watching her more intently, as if trying to memorize her features or decode some hidden message in her expressions. The renovations began to take shape, walls coming down and new spaces emerging. But beneath the physical transformation, something else was building, a tension that threatened to crack the careful facade all three of them had constructed. The announcement of Richard's multi-million-dollar donation to the community center made headlines in the local press. He insisted on making it through a blind trust, keeping his name officially separate from the project, but the business community quickly connected the dots. The donation wasn't just money. It included provisions for ongoing funding, scholarships, and sustainable programming. Maya discovered the full scope of the donation while reviewing project documents. Her hands trembled as she read through the details. Art supplies for a decade, teaching salaries, maintenance funds, even a stipend program for students who couldn't afford classes. Everything she'd wished for as a child, laid out in careful legal language. "He's trying to buy your forgiveness," Jake suggested when she showed him the documents in her apartment that evening. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Maya stared at the papers spread across her kitchen table. That's the problem. He's doing exactly what I would have done in his position. It's smart, practical, and actually helpful. I want to be angry, but he's finally acting like a father, Jake finished. The community center's construction progressed rapidly. Maya found herself spending more time there, often staying late into the night, imagining the space filled with young artists. During one such evening, Richard's wheelchair-accessible van pulled up outside. I wanted to see it in person, he explained as his nurse helped him navigate the ramp they'd just installed. Screen meetings don't do it justice. Maya watched him take in the space, noting how his eyes lingered on the areas she'd specifically designed for art classes. Why did you do it? She asked finally. The donation, all of this, why now? Richard wheeled himself to the window, overlooking the neighborhood. I spent my life building things for profit. Glass towers, luxury condos, monuments to wealth. But seeing your work, understanding what art meant to you, I realized I'd been building the wrong things. Mom used to paint, Maya said quietly. Did you know that? She gave it up to work extra shifts, keep us fed. Her hands would shake too much from exhaustion to hold a brush. Richard's shoulders tensed. I didn't know. There's so much I didn't know, didn't ask, and he broke off, struggling with emotions he'd spent decades suppressing. The money helps, Maya acknowledged. These kids will have opportunities one never had. But it doesn't change the past. No, Richard agreed. It doesn't. But maybe it can change the future. The conversation was interrupted by Veronica's unexpected arrival. She took in the scene, Richard and Maya alone in the half-finished building, with barely concealed displeasure. The board meeting ended early, she announced. I thought I'd find you here. Her eyes moved critically over the space. It's coming along. The tension in the room shifted, became sharper. Maya gathered her drawings, making a quiet exit while Veronica began discussing business matters with Richard. Through the window, she saw them arguing, Veronica's gestures becoming increasingly animated. The next day, during the project update meeting, Maya presented her final designs for the art program. She included a dedication plaque that read, "In memory of Elena Martinez, artist, mother, dreamer." Richard's image on the video screen remained still for a long moment before he spoke. The plaque, it's perfect. His voice carried an emotion that made even Veronica glance away from her phone. Later that week, Maya received an unexpected delivery at her apartment, a small, worn sketchbook. Inside, she found her mother's early drawings, dated from before her birth. A note from Richard explained, "Elena left this in my office the day I told her I was leaving. I kept it all these years without the courage to return it." Maya spent the night going through the sketchbook, seeing her mother's talent captured in quick strokes and detailed studies. She recognized elements of her own style in her mother's work, the same way she now recognized elements of Richard in herself. The community center continued to transform, both physically and symbolically. Each new addition felt like another word in an ongoing conversation between father and daughter, a conversation they were finally learning to have, not through direct confrontation, but through shared purpose and gradual understanding. As the project neared completion, Maya found herself staying later at the center, adding her own touches to the space. One evening, she realized she was painting in the same careful, deliberate way Richard approached his business decisions, methodically, with attention to detail and long-term impact. The recognition didn't anger her as it once would have. Instead, it felt like accepting a truth about herself she'd long tried to deny. The morning of the community center's inauguration dawned clear and bright. Maya arrived early, watching contractors make final adjustments to the new signage. The building stood transformed, no longer the crumbling structure of her childhood, but a modern facility that maintained its community character. Inside, the main gallery was hung with artwork from local artists, including 3 of Maya's pieces. She'd chosen works that told stories of absence and reconciliation, their meaning clear to anyone who knew where to look. The centerpiece was a large canvas showing 2 hands almost touching, reminiscent of Michelangelo's creation of Adam. but with a distinctly urban backdrop. Richard arrived an hour before the ceremony. His wheelchair now navigated with practiced ease. Months of physical therapy had restored some movement to his legs, though walking remained a distant goal. He wore a simple suit rather than his usual designer attire, seeming to understand that this event called for humility rather than power. "The gallery exceeded my expectations," he said, wheeling through the space. His eyes lingered on Maya's paintings, recognizing himself in the shadowy father figure she depicted. The ceremony began with community leaders and local officials making expected speeches about progress and opportunity. Then Maya stepped up to the podium. She had prepared careful remarks about the center's mission, but looking out at the crowd, at the faces of people who shared her story of struggle and perseverance, she set aside her notes. "Art saved my life," she began, her voice steady. "When words failed, when pain felt overwhelming, I found my voice through creating. This center exists because someone finally understood that value." She paused, meeting Richard's eyes. "Sometimes the greatest acts of creation come from acknowledging our failures and trying to build something new." The audience shifted, sensing the personal weight behind her words. Richard's hands gripped his wheelchair armrests, his knuckles white. When it was Richard's turn to speak, his assistant helped him to the podium. He looked older than his years, humbled by circumstance and choice. "I've spent my life building monuments to success," he said. "Glass towers that reach for the sky, but cast shadows over communities like this one. Today, we're building something different, a space for dreams to grow, for voices to be heard." He turned toward Maya. "I've learned, too late perhaps, that our greatest legacy isn't in what we build, but in who we fail to nurture." The audience murmured, sensing the unfolding of a deeper story. Among them, a reporter from the Los Angeles Times leaned forward, recording every word. That's when Veronica noticed Julian Martinez in the crowd, a face she hadn't seen in 25 years. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The reporter caught the moan, NT of recognition, saw the panic flash across Veronica's face. Within hours, the story broke online. Real estate mogul's secret daughter behind community center project. The article pieced together Maya's history, Richard's accident, and their unexpected reunion. But it went further, hinting at deeper secrets. The reporter had uncovered old records, testimonies from former employees, suggesting that Richard's abandonment of Elena and Maya hadn't been a simple case of a young man choosing career over family. Maya's phone exploded with notifications. Gallery owners who had praised her work now wanted exclusive interviews about her inspiring journey. Real estate blogs speculated about her potential claim to the Thompson fortune. Social media filled with competing narratives, some painting her as a gold digger, others as a wronged heir. Late that night, after the crowds had gone, Maya stood alone in the gallery. Her phone buzzed with another call, this time from a private investigator claiming to have information about why Richard really left her mother. The PI mentioned Veronica's name, suggested there was evidence of threats, of manipulation. Maya stared at her centerpiece painting, those almost touching hands. The space between them seemed wider now, filled with newly uncovered secrets and questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Richard, watching from the doorway, saw her expression change. "Maya," he started, but she held up her hand. "Don't," she said. "Whatever the truth is, whatever happened back then, I need to hear it all at once. No more gradual revelations, no more half-truths." The gallery lights cast their shadows on the wall, a daughter standing tall, a father in his wheelchair, and between them, 25 years of secrets about to break free. The media storm hit with devastating precision. Within days, paparazzi camped outside Maya's apartment, forcing her to temporarily move in with Jake. Business networks ran speculative pieces about the impact on Thompson Development's stock price. Social media sleuths dug through decades-old records, constructing theories about Richard's past. Veronica orchestrated damage control from the Thompson mansion, her PR team working overtime to spin narratives. But she couldn't control the steady leak of information that seemed to emerge from multiple sources. Old photographs surfaced showing Elena at company events. Former employees began speaking anonymously about strange occurrences from 25 years ago. Maya discovered her mother's name trending on social media, her life story dissected by strangers. "They're turning her into a soap opera," she told Jake, scrolling through countless posts. She was more than just the other woman in their story. At the rehabilitation center, Richard faced his own siege. Reporters disguised as visitors tried to slip past security. Board members demanded emergency meetings. His phone filled with messages from old associates either distancing themselves or offering suspicious support. The breaking point came when a tabloid published Elena's private letters. Correspondence she'd sent to Richard during her pregnancy, never delivered because Veronica had intercepted them. Maya learned about their existence from a morning news alert. Richard found the article on his tablet during physical therapy. His legs buckled during a standing exercise, and for once it wasn't from physical weakness. The letters revealed Elena's desperate attempts to reach him, her belief that he'd chosen to ignore her rather than the truth. He'd never known she tried to contact him. Veronica arrived at the rehabilitation center that afternoon, dressed immaculately as always, but with new tension around her eyes. "We need to get ahead of this," she announced, closing the door to Richard's private room. "I've prepared a statement. Did you threaten Elena?" Richard interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. Veronica's perfect composure cracked slightly. "Everything I did was to protect our future. You were building something important. Did you threaten my daughter's mother?" Richard's wheelchair moved closer to her, his hands gripping the arms until his knuckles turned white. "She was going to ruin everything." Veronica snapped, her carefully maintained facade finally breaking. "You were about to close the Martinez development deal, your first major project. Elena knew about the zoning irregularities, the payments to officials. She could have destroyed everything we'd worked for. So you made her disappear." Richard's voice was hollow. "Made me think she'd taken the money I offered and chosen to vanish." "I gave her a choice," Veronica countered. "Leave quietly with enough money to start over, or watch you go to prison for fraud. She chose to protect you." The truth hung between them like poison gas. 25 years of marriage, success, and shared ambition dissolved in the face of this long-buried betrayal. "Elena died thinking I abandoned our child willingly," Richard said, each word carved from ice. "Maya grew up believing her father chose wealth over love. And you've sat across from me at dinner for 25 years, watching me build my legacy on that lie." "I built that legacy too," Veronica hissed. "Everything you are, everything we've achieved. I've been there, making the hard choices, keeping you clean, managing the fallout. You needed me." "No," Richard replied. "I needed the truth. I needed the chance to choose my own path. You took that from me, from all of us." He reached for his phone, scrolling through recent messages. "The board meets tomorrow. I'm stepping down as CEO and transferring majority control to a blind trust." He looked up at his wife of 25 years. "You should have your lawyers contact mine about divorce proceedings." Veronica's face went pale. "You're throwing everything away? For what? A grown daughter who hates you? A dead woman's memory?" "No," Richard said quietly. "I'm finally choosing the right path, 25 years too late." As Veronica's heels clicked away down the hospital corridor, Richard pulled up Maya's contact information. His finger hovered over the call button as he struggled to find words big enough to bridge the chasm of lies between them. Outside his window, camera flashes punctuated the gathering darkness. Tomorrow, the world would dissect every detail of their family tragedy. But tonight, a father had to find the courage to tell his daughter the whole truth, even if it meant losing her all over again. The mysterious caller turned out to be Julian Martinez, Elena's older brother, who had maintained a silent watch over Maya's life from afar. He requested a meeting at his law office in downtown Los Angeles, away from the media circus. Maya arrived with Jake, finding Richard already there in his wheelchair, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. Julian sat behind his desk, a thick folder in front of him. "Elena left this with me," Julian began, opening the folder. "She made me promise to reveal it only if certain circumstances aligned. Your reunion with Richard and the public exposure have met those conditions." He pulled out a document that made Richard's breath catch. the original contract for the Martinez development project, the cornerstone of his empire. Along with it were bank statements, photographs, and a handwritten letter from Elena. "Your mother wasn't just a young woman Richard abandoned," Julian explained to Maya. "She was a junior legal assistant at the development company Richard worked for before starting his own firm. She discovered irregularities in the Martinez project: bribes, fraudulent permits, displacement of families without proper compensation." Maya watched Richard's face as Julian continued. "Elena tried to report it through proper channels, but the corruption went too deep. When she found out she was pregnant with you, she approached Richard directly, believing he was different from the off. I was," Richard whispered. "Or I thought I was. But Veronica." Julian nodded grimly. "Veronica intercepted Elena's attempts to reach Richard. She presented your mother with an impossible choice: disappear with enough money to raise you comfortably, or watch your father go to prison for his role in the fraud. Mom chose to protect him." Maya realized, her voice thick with emotion. "Even after everything. She did more than that," Julian continued, pulling out more documents. "She used the money Veronica gave her to quietly buy property in the neighborhoods being developed. Small parcels, nothing suspicious at the time. But over the years, those properties appreciated significantly." He slid a financial statement across the desk. "Maya, you're not just Richard's daughter. You're the owner of real estate worth nearly $500 million. Your mother built a secret empire parallel to your father's, always hoping you'd understand why she made the choices she did." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the revelation sank in. Maya stared at the statement, seeing her mother's careful planning laid out in columns of numbers and property deeds. "There's more," Julian said softly, producing Elena's letter. "She wrote this before she died, explaining everything. But she also left instructions about the properties. She wanted them used to rebuild the communities that were displaced, to create spaces for art and education. Exactly what you're doing with the community center." Richard wheeled closer to Maya, his hands trembling. "I never knew. All these years, I thought I was the one building something meaningful, but Elena, she was the true visionary." Maya opened her mother's letter, recognizing the elegant handwriting that had helped her with homework, signed permission slips, written encouraging notes in her first sketchbook. As she read, tears fell onto the paper. "She forgave you," Maya said finally, looking at Richard. "She wrote that she hoped we'd find each other someday, that we'd understand we're more alike than different, both builders, both dreamers, both trying to leave something meaningful behind." Outside Julian's office, the city hummed with life. The media would soon discover this new chapter in their story. But for now, in this quiet room, father and daughter began to see each other clearly for the first time. "I want to honor her vision," Maya said, straightening her shoulders. "Use these properties the way she intended, not for profit but for people. Not to compete with your empire, but to complement it, to heal what was broken." Richard reached for her hand, and this time, Maya didn't pull away. "We'll do it together," he said. "If you let me help, not as a businessman, but as your father." Jake, who had remained quietly supportive throughout the revelations, stepped forward. The community center could be just the beginning, a model for similar projects across the city. Maya looked at the gathering of men around her. Her uncle who had kept her mother's secrets, her father who was finally ready to be worthy of that title, and Jake who had helped her find her own strength. In her hand, she held her mother's letter, a bridge between past and future. "Mom wrote something else," Maya said, reading from the letter. "The greatest act of love is letting go of anger to build something new." She wasn't just talking about forgiving you, Dad. She was talking about all of us, how we choose to use our power, our pain, our privilege. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in colors that would have inspired Elena to paint. In a high-rise office, her daughter and the man she had once loved began planning a new kind of legacy. One built not on secrets and separation, but on truth and transformation. A week later, the community center hosted its first art class. Maya watched children enter the building, their eyes wide with possibility. On the wall, beside Elena's memorial plaque, hung an EW piece, Maya's painting of those almost touching hands, now modified. The hands had moved closer, their fingers finally meeting, creating something new in the space between past and future.